to the political impact, since the political science is your wheelhouse, Dr. Bob Holsworth. What is the expected impact in 2020 on voter registration and turnout modeling? What are you hearing and seeing so far? Because I think the registration numbers are down considerably.
Yeah, registrations are considerably down because you can't run the same kind of registration campaigns that you normally do. So that's the first point. And I think the second point that you raise is one that people are really just beginning to talk about, which is what in the world is this election going to look like in November? I mean, one of the big unknowns, Chris, is that we have no idea what the situation will be with the flu and the virus at the same time in November. Is that you know, could they both come back at the same time? Could that really impact in-person voting? And what's that going to mean for absentee voting? We now have in Virginia, as you know, the no absentee voting, no excuses absentee voting. I think there's going to be far more people using that than ever before. But by and large, what is that going to mean in terms of partisan split? What groups are more likely to use it than others? What does it mean for young people? You know, for example, young people, particularly those in college and universities, often now vote at their colleges and universities in registration. You know, if they don't have those kind of registration movements, does that mean they have to vote absentee? Much less likely to vote absentee, I think. So that's the big uncertainty, I think. The wild card of this election is we really don't know about the turnout and how that election is going to proceed, not only here in Virginia, but all across the country.
Yeah, and I think that is a disadvantage for Democrats who annually have very sophisticated registration drives to mitigate the downside of people moving in and out of the state. They've really had a better handle on that than the Republicans. Not that I think it makes up the difference in a presidential year in Virginia, but it's certainly going to be an impact.
Yeah, it could have an impact in congressional races for sure. And you know, so you have these two features that on one hand you have the you know, you have the whole issue of registration, and then secondly you have this whole issue of absentee ballots and mail-in voting. The president has been, you know, adamant that mail-in voting is you know, is terrible and destructive and could be a sense of fraud. Typically, Republicans do better with mail-in ballots, I think, you know, historically. You know, if you're thinking about the military voting, how do they vote in Virginia? You know, many of them, you know, thousands of them, you know, vote by mail, tens of thousands of them vote by mail. And so we don't know how that's going to play out nationally as well. But by and large, I think the registration issue is a real challenge for Democrats, not only here in Virginia, where I think it'll be more important in congressional races and presidential races, but certainly nationally in these battleground states that they need to win, where if they look at 2016, they didn't turn out their base voters as well as Republicans did.
Yeah, especially with the lack of enthusiasm Joe Biden's having with the younger set. While he might be polling there, the thought of them coming out and supporting Joe Biden is not as intense as it was, say, 8 years ago or even 12 years ago for Barack Obama. And those people, look, if you look at those people, the kids who are now, and I'll just take our example in our house, we have 2 more eligible voters than the last presidential cycle, and they're like, they're just not there when it comes to politics. They're like, I just don't like either of them. It's going to be a tough sell for both political parties.
Yeah, I think, you know, whether the young people get out and get energized, and typically, you know, they get energized in part because of what's happening on their campuses.
Right.
And the question is, you know, how is that going to play out on Virginia campuses and campuses across the country? In California, for example, you know, the California state system is going to basically be online. Again, it's not going to affect presidential elections there, but it could well affect you know, congressional elections, and there will be battleground states where these issues are going to impact the presidential as well.
Especially in Virginia, where we have so many out-of-state students who now register here and will domicile here in Virginia.
Oh yeah, and again, there are just so many issues that are involved if the students are not voting in person on campus, that if they have to vote absentee, it is a much more unusual task for them to do that, and a more complicated task.
Let's switch over to Virginia politics, since it's always on high gear, it seems. We only take July off every year, and we're at the end of July, so we're about to be back on. 2021 gubernatorial cycle, the House of Delegates up. We have a constitutional amendment up this year for the ballot as well. How do you see 2021 shaping up, given those who have announced and are looking at the race so far?
Well, I think for Republicans, if Donald Trump wins the presidency, they're not going to win the governorship in 2021. They're going to have they're going to have a uphill climb no matter what. So the Democratic side is very interesting right now because it's so unusual.
Right.
In this particular instance, historically, we would have expected perhaps a contest between the Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor for the nomination. Maybe one of them would step aside. None of that's happening, and in fact, neither of them are the favorite. We have announced Jennifer McClellan, Jennifer Carol Foy, certainly Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. I presume Mark Herring is running, but he hasn't raised much money about the race. And the elephant in the room, of course, or outside the room at the moment, is Terry McAuliffe, who's raised almost $2 million and is thinking of running again. And so it's going to be a kind of year that the Democrats have never had, I think. There are a number of Democrats who clearly think that McAuliffe is a shoo-in if he runs and he gets the nomination. They're going to be supporting him. But at the same time, there's a lot of Democrats who believe that it's time for someone like Jennifer McClellan, who has been a sort of person that they've wanted to run for statewide office for years, to be the governor. And then I wouldn't negate the potential appeal to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party by Jennifer Carol Foy. She's raised $700 million, particularly from 700,000, excuse me, 700,000 from Michael Bills and Sonia Smith. I think that 500,000 from the folks who funded so many Democratic campaigns previously. So it's really sort of an unusual situation on the Democratic side. I presume if Terry McAuliffe gets in the race, he's going to be a clear favorite, but by and large, it's a very different race. And, Jennifer McClellan is extraordinarily well-liked among Democrats. And at the same time, Jennifer Carol Foy is going to have a bit of a constituency, I think somewhat constituency in the progressive wing of the party, particularly those folks who did not like Terry McAuliffe's support for the pipelines there. Republicans, I think, are just a mess right now again, with former Senator Carrico and, probably the most vocal person out there is Amanda Chase, who, if she got the nomination, we'd have a repeat of Corey Stewart elections that we've seen previously. And the real question for the Republican Party in Virginia, I think, is when does it realize that Virginia has significantly changed, that it has to find a way of winning in the suburbs, and that it has to look outside to, to these blue states like Maryland and Massachusetts, where you have Republican governors who were elected, but were elected largely, as Bob McDonnell was in 2009, on a jobs economic development platform, and minimize some of these social issues that are just anathema to people in the suburbs right now.
Well, that's the hard part. Let me since you covered a lot of ground there, I want to get specific with you. Let's talk about those large donations, hundreds of thousands of dollars from single people going to specific candidates and causes. In this populist era, do you think we have an opportunity to ask what these people want? Shouldn't they be filling out economic disclosure forms? I mean, $500,000 to one candidate is a lot of money.
Oh, it absolutely is. Now, and they're monies that come in different ways too. I mean that, but what you've seen now is on the Democratic side, what they have done, and one of the reasons why they've been successful is that they have completely changed the nature of fundraising in Virginia. So if you looked at the last election cycle in 2019, and you would know this well, Chris, what you found is that the traditional funders of Virginia politics, what I'd call the Virginia business community, the majority of their dollars, not in the entirety, but the majority of their dollars went to Republicans because they were a little worried about one-party control of the state. And typically that would have been a significant challenge for the Democrats, but it wasn't. And it wasn't for two reasons, is that A, they did extraordinarily well in the off-year election with small donors, but small donors from Virginia and elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
You had situations where you had communities in Pennsylvania adopting a delegate race in Virginia through Act Blue.
Right.
And so the Democrats killed the Republicans and the small donors, but what was even more surprising, with the large donors, they also killed the Republicans. That by and large, you had situations where you had Emily's List, sort of national organizations countering and even exceeding what some of the, like the NRA or groups that normally supported the Republicans were. And then you had the individual large donors, Michael Bills and Sonia Smith, who basically said, we're just going to donate to people that we think are going to be progressive on the environmental matters. And what was interesting, I saw this wonderful interview with Mr. Bills, where he said, I just looked at this. He said, now I looked at how much money Dominion had given over the, gave in a particular cycle. And I thought, I can match it without much problem. And he did, and probably exceeded in 2018 what Dominion gave. So this has really raised that whole issue about money in politics and what it means. But what's happened is that the Democrats have found a way to get beyond a traditional weakness. That on one hand, many Democratic progressives said, oh, we've been too close to the Virginia business community because we've needed their money. They don't need it any longer. They have found a way out of it. And that has really changed the nature of fundraising in Virginia, and is changing the nature of politics as well.
Absolutely. And then one of the problems for Republicans is they haven't quite figured out the model because they were so used to winning elections, they didn't have to. The way they redrew the maps, we redrew the maps. You didn't have to go out. You could go to the business community. You could go to the trade associations, the lobbyists, and get enough money to win your campaigns. But now the model has been upside down for them. And I don't want to dwell on that too much, but let's just finish up with probably the most recent news relative to the business community and candidates. Amanda Chase was disinvited from the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce just on an introductory conversation interview. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think that what you're seeing is that the business community, particularly up in Northern Virginia, just has no interest in being involved in these kind of the social movement that someone like Amanda Chase represents. They would clearly prefer Ralph Northam and Terry McAuliffe to Amanda Chase, if you take a look at where the Northern Virginia business community would be. So the question is for Virginia Republicans, how do they begin to find a way to muster some populist support for people who could actually be supported strongly by the Virginia business community in a statewide race? They didn't have one with Corey Stewart. And at the moment, I'm not sure they're going to have one in 2021. Now, again, if Joe Biden's elected president, we may see something different. We may see a number of different kind of people emerge in Virginia. Certainly someone like Barbara Comstock has spoken about, spoken with some people about it. I think there are some people outside of the political arena who have connections in the business community who might be interested in running. But their question always is, can they actually win in a Republican nominating contest? And when they look at things like what happened with Denver Riggleman, they just wonder whether it's worth the effort.
Well, and if the Republican State Central Committee was supposed to meet on August 15th, chooses convention again, stupidly, they just shot themselves in the foot.
Oh yeah, I mean that will happen again. And so, here's a party that has, as I said, in races for governor, senator, and president, it has won once since 2005. It's gone 15 years and it's had one victory, and that was Bob McDonnell in 2009, who, even though he was a strong social conservative, ran as a suburban jobs creator.
Right.
On that front.
He's a nice guy.
And here is a guy who, grew up in Fairfax, lived in Virginia Beach, and understood the nature of Virginia politics, which has even changed a little bit and moved left since then. So again, it's not to say, people, I talk to some people who say, well, the Republicans will never win again. I said, no, look, they win in Maryland, they win in Massachusetts. It's the governor's race is a race about candidates. You have to have the right candidate. You're right to win the right candidate, and you're competitive. But they're not going to win with until they realize that in some fashion.
I don't think that concerns them. Even though Bob McDonnell won by 17 points and Ralph Northern won by 8, that's a 25-point swing over just 12 years. It was actually 8 years. From 09 to 17, the thing flipped 25 points, and they still haven't figured out why they continue to lose. It's actually shocking. Well, it's actually not shocking. It's becoming so repetitive. No one's shocked anymore.
No, I mean, you can go back and if you want to revise history, what if Bill Bolling is the nominee in against Terry McAuliffe in 2013? Is that race? McAuliffe beat Cuccinelli by 2 points.
Bolling wins.
I mean, what's the situation there?
I think Bolling would have won that, don't you?
Well, I think at that time McAuliffe was not seen as someone who was going to be a good governor. I think his reputation is certainly enhanced since he became governor, actually, because people think he did a pretty good job. But he was seen as a kind of a little bit of a carpetbagger, an outsider. Bolling would have been a very, very strong candidate in 2013. As I said, Cuccinelli almost won. It's hard to think that Bolling wouldn't have won.
Right, and I think you're right. I think Bolling would have made a better statewide candidate, and I don't think Terry McAuliffe did anything to harm his reputation as being a good governor. Certainly, jobs growth and economic investment, which is what he ran on. That was his whole platform, was jobs, and that was it.
Yeah, and I think he transformed his reputation actually inside Virginia. That he had been seen, sort of an outside deal maker. He had been an operator. He'd been an operative in politics. All of a sudden, he's governor, and the state does pretty darn well. And by and large, I think he reminded me a little bit in terms of his promotion of economic development as a salesman for Virginia, like George Allen.
Yep.
20 years previously. He just loved doing that. And at the same time, for the Democratic base, he was, as he said, he was a rock on most liberal social issues. And that was a winning combination in Virginia, to be progressive on social issues and promoting economic development and jobs on the economic side, and somewhat bipartisan there.
I mean, it seems to me, if you just look back in recent history in the last, say, the generation of George Allen to Northam, every winning candidate has come from the, let's don't rock the boat with so much, make sure we're growing the economy, and don't turn over every affair of state into this big, kerfluffle. Just manage the government, grow the jobs, and get the heck out of the way. I mean, that seems to be a winning formula that the Republicans haven't quite figured out since 2009.
No, and they, as I said, they figured it out in other states, but in Virginia, they just seem to redouble their efforts to think, we weren't sufficiently conservative on the social issue. So let's see how much further can we go. So it's bizarre, but because parties used to be seen as, when I was taking political science, and maybe you were taking political science, their purpose was to win elections.
You know where the votes are.
That seems to have, somehow disappeared from the Republican mindset here.
So. three of the most popular governors in the country are the governors of Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont, and they're all Republicans. And they're deeply blue states, and they haven't quite figured out how to win. You have to be nice to people.
No, and it's just hard to imagine that hasn't happened. But I think for many Republicans, they simply are hoping that maybe Nova will secede at some time from from Virginia, maybe they will never have to win there. But I mean, Tim Kaine beat Corey Stewart by 221,000 votes in Fairfax County. That was his margin.
And here's the funny thing. I interviewed Corey Stewart in 2018 about his immigration stance. And he said, what we need to do is increase immigration from 1 million to 2 million a year. Legal immigration from 1 million to 2 million. I said, that's great. Would you also take that new 1 million out of the current existing illegal population in America? He said, yeah, but I'm not going to call that amnesty. I'm like, oh, of course not. Let's not do that, because they're so trapped by their own rigidity. They can't get out of their own way.
Yeah. Well, again, so the question is, when can they begin to do that? And the challenge is that some of the folks who would like to see a different Republican Party, many of the business-oriented leaders, some of them have almost given up on that. They've just become, they think it's problematic. Certainly, they believe, they're not happy with what they consider to be the progressive direction of some of the Democratic Party on business issues, which is different than it was, let us say, when Mark Warner was the governor. But at the same time, the party doesn't seem to have an infrastructure that has been hospitable to people making the kind of pleas in Virginia, or the kind of case in Virginia that has worked in blue-leaning states elsewhere for governor. And I'm not sure that's changing, at least.
I'll finish on this note. I hear more and more Democrats saying, "I wish the Republicans were more competitive with us, so we wouldn't fall to the wide-eyed far leftist progressives in their own party." I mean, they're fearful of their own party going so far to the left because Republicans offer no counterbalance.
Yeah, well, that's the real challenge right now that's emerged inside the Democratic Party. I think, if it won't happen until 2023, but Chap Peterson would obviously have competition in Northern Virginia. I can't imagine Dick Saslaw could win another Democratic primary that he only won last time because there were two progressives against him. That by and large, the progressive wing has a lot of energy in the Democratic side, that they are the people who are organizing. They're not the only wing in the party, though. I mean, that I think that, the Black Caucus is very, has gained power inside the Democratic Party. They're somewhat more moderate on issues, I think, than some of the progressive wing is on some matters. But by and large, the Democratic Party now is not just a centrist party in Virginia; it's a center-left party, and the left is growing in influence.
Similar to what the Republicans went through in its own evolution. Dr. Bob Holsworth, thank you for your time. Look forward to joining you again next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Thanks for your time.
Hey, good to see you, Chris. Have a good week.
Always. Take care of yourself. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.